it's interesting because when I first got here, I'm not a joiner, but if you're going to do something like that, you kind of have to be a joiner. You have to like go and join everything. And so at the time, I joined a lot of like American women professionals and political, like Democrats abroad or whatever. And then at a certain point, if you're going to be here and decide to stay, and I had like decided to stay 5 years in, you kind of get out of that. Like your life doesn't become about that anymore. And at some point it's important that you do, because I remember I was going to these, used to be like these curry nights, and it also became a lot of expats complaining about Germans all the time, which is not, I'm not above that, but after a while it's sort of like up or out. I'm not going to just live in this expat bubble.
Welcome to We're Moving to Europe. It's a podcast for you if you're an American who's curious or serious about moving to a country in Europe. I'm Casey Kelly. I moved from Texas to Portugal a little over 2 years ago after my young adult kids moved to Sweden and the Netherlands, and now we're helping other Americans research and plan their moves to different countries in Europe without stressing out, wasting money, or losing time. If you want to move somewhere in Europe and you aren't sure yet how to make it happen, you're in the right place. All right, today we're talking with Eleanor Mayrhofer, who has lived and worked in Germany since 1999. She's an American-born digital marketing professional who works with experts and business leaders, and she is graciously sharing her time today to talk about her experience building and running her business in Germany. So, Eleanor, welcome to the show, and thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your background. Like, how did you come to Germany from the U.S., and why did you end up staying?
Yeah, it was all kind of a big accident. I studied design in San Francisco in the 90s, and this guy from Munich, his mom was actually American, moved into our, where I was living with college roommates. There's a word for it in German, a Wohngemeinschaft, but I'll just call it living with college roommates. And once you get one person from Europe sleeping on your sofa in San Francisco, a lot of other people come visit, backpacking through the States, coming to California. And then just coincidentally, a good friend of mine who I was going to design school with, he was actually from outside of Vienna, but him and his girlfriend were neighbors in San Francisco. But anyway, so I sort of developed a group of friends from Munich. And this friend, this neighbor and fellow student had moved back to Europe after we finished our studies. And he was living in Munich, so he didn't have to do his like military service in Austria. And at this time, the internet had completely blossomed, and everybody who was working as a designer in San Francisco was overnight a web designer. And on my first trip to Europe, I was visiting, and I visited him, and we were sitting in a beer garden in Munich, and I was telling him about how like this internet thing was amazing. And he said, well, why don't you come here and we'll start a business? And I just needed the slightest of pushes. I had gotten a travel bug, and I wanted to, like, Germany and Munich was certainly not my first choice, but I hadn't been out of the gate for my studies that long. And if I was going to go try and live in a foreign country, which I wanted to do, I had to, there was no digital nomad. That wasn't a thing at all back then. So I felt like I had to go somewhere where I could conceivably get a job and start my career. And I knew a few people there. So I was like, well, I'll just pack up all my stuff and come over for a while. And if it doesn't work, I'll just move back home. So it was just kind of a whim.
Had you been to Germany before? Or
no, that was my first trip to Europe. Oh, wow. I was just primed. I had like gotten out of a really dumb relationship. I was in my late 20s. I was like, if I'm ever going to do anything like this, it's now or never.
Yeah. So then how did it go with building your business? And because clearly it worked.
Well, no, it did not. That was a complete cockamamie scheme for a couple of reasons. He knew nobody in Munich. He had no network there. I came over on a tourist visa. I'd saved like a pile of money because I had been freelancing at startups in San Francisco. I couldn't speak like a lick of German. I mean, I had some Berlitz, I guess, CDs that I had listened to before I moved here. And so at some point I was like, I'm going to run out of money. And we would just kind of surf the internet. It was just like, we had no plan. It was ridiculous in retrospect. And it was very hard to get an apartment. I was living in our office because if you come here and like, you have no job, no nothing, the rental market is even more so now, but even then it was competitive. Like everybody's like, who are you? No, you can't get a rental contract. So then I was like, I either have to go home or I have to get a real job. And so I was just kind of networking around. And then I got wind of a job. It was a book agency that was also doing websites. And I had been working at a book agency before I came, like doing, book packaging and book cover design. And so they hired me, but I came over on a tourist visa. I had no work permit. I had no nothing. And I said to the guy at this agency, like, hey man, I need a work permit. I'm like kind of just winging it here. And he's like, no problem. I'll get you one. And at that time, and I think still you have to say like, why can't a German person do this job?
Right.
So it was all of that. And so he assured me like, no problem. And then the first month that I had been working there, he kind of sheepishly pulled me aside and handed me an envelope full of, this was Deutschmarks. This is how long ago it was, like full of Deutschmarks. And he was like, look, it's harder to get you this work permit than I thought. So here's some money. And I was like, okay. And that went on for a while. And I kind of was like, I do want to stay here. I like it. Mm-hmm. And so it was a small agency. It was very chaotic. And so I was doing a lot of networking and going to events with other like expats. There were things going on in the city. And at that time, this was around 2000 now. And this is the first Web 1.0 bubble. But there were all these companies coming to Munich. Munich has always been a big hub for industry. And there was a lot of kind of traditional IT consultancy firms that were bolting on agency services, and they were all coming to Munich. So there were a lot of them around. Somebody said, go to Sapient, they're hiring. This was a big firm at the time. And I went in, the recruiter was from Boston. He was like, how's your German? And I was like, it's okay. He said, oh, it doesn't matter. And I just got a job there. And that was a full, American company setting up its German operations with infrastructure. So I like gave them my passport and whatever. 2 weeks later, it came back with all of my paperwork, everything done. And it was that job that helped me get established here.
Oh, wow. And can we just take a minute to say how lucky you were? I mean, obviously you were talented and worked hard and did the networking, but to be able to walk into a job like that with an American company that's setting up overseas is not something that everyone who's listening to this is going to be able to do.
Yeah, I was lucky in a number of ways. Also, because at the time between me landing and getting that job, your tourist visa is 3 months. So I still had to go to the immigration office, and the immigration office is notoriously like not nice here. But I had, for some reason, wasn't my married name. It was Ray. So I had the lady under R, and she was like super laid back and like, well, you've got to either get a real job or get married. Here's 3 more months. And she just kept doing that until like, I don't know what cosmic forces were in my favor, but it was I had a lot of luck.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so then from there, now you're running your own business. So how did that come about and what's that been like?
Well, I will say, I mean, it's a different world, obviously, but working here for 10 years, and I stayed at that agency for 10 years, Sapient. So that allowed me to essentially get a green card. So there are certain freelancing visas here, but once I had that, I was good as gold to basically do whatever I want. So once I decided I wanted to start my own business or work as a freelancer, I could do that. And I think I had to work I think you had to be, have consistent employment for 5 years before you do that. I guess a few things happened. You build a real network, and wherever, I don't care if you're in your home country or in, a new country, a network is everything. So when I decided to hang out my own shingle, and there was a process between quitting that corporate job and starting my own business. So I kind of first started contracting, so freelancing basically, but at agencies. So a lot of people at the company I had worked on had gone on to other agencies or companies. So once you have that network, you kind of just tell a few people like, okay, I've quit. I'm like ready for projects. And I didn't have to do much to get those because that was just all from my network. And in terms of getting started, I had also gotten married in the meantime. And lucky, another amazing stroke of luck, my brother-in-law is a tax advisor. And so he did all the stuff I needed to do. And then when I wanted to kind of establish myself as a freelancer, there's this thing in Germany called Gründungszuschuss Geld, which means, it basically means like startup money. So even if you quit your job, you can write up a little business plan and they will give you, it's changed a lot since when I did it, but basically they will give you a portion of your salary up to 1,800 euros a month and pay your health insurance. And then after that runs out, I know when I did it, I said to my husband, I can't believe they're giving me all this money. And I like quit my job. He's like, you've been paying into the system for 10 years. It's your money. And I was like, well, I guess if you put it that way, yeah. But so I did the Gründungszuschussgeld to help me just kind of get my bearings, but I was able to get work pretty quickly. But at the time I was also kind of starting this other business idea. So I was half freelancing, half I had started a printable business. And then when the 18 months runs out, they still pay half your health insurance for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And this is, I don't know how much into the boring administrative details you want to get about healthcare systems and what's covered and what's not.
Would love it.
Okay.
If you have time, let's get into it.
Sure. So
because people want to know.
Yeah. Germany has most, if not all European countries, universal healthcare, but every system is different. And the Americans in the audience might understand what Germany has. It doesn't have like Medicare for all or an NHS or the Canadian system. It has sort of like the ACA in the States, but also a public option. So you can either be privately insured or you can be publicly insured. The thing is, so when I came here, like if you just walk in and you haven't been paying into the system, you basically have to buy private insurance. And there's some advantages to this. Like, you can get a room, your own room, you can get all these extra treatments, but it's not cheap. By the time I had quit my job, I think it was 600 or 700 euros a month, but my employer was paying half of that. So it works that way. And the thing is, to be privately insured, you have to be making a certain amount of money. I don't know what it is now. It's maybe like 60,000 euros because they want to make sure there's enough people on the public system and the private system. And you usually cannot switch. Once you're on one system, you can't go onto the public system, except in certain circumstances. So like when you go freelance. So that was my opportunity to go onto the public system. And the public system, I personally have not noticed a lot of differences. You can like, if you want your own room, you can like top up and pay privately. And because I still think like an American, like when I had a baby, I was like, I want my own room. And they're like, oh, you have to pay for that. You have to pay for that. And I'm just like, oh my God, $5,000, what's it going to be? And they're like, it's 100 euro. It's like, okay, fine. Okay.
Yeah.
We're like ultrasounds. I'm like, oh my God. And they're like, it's 40 euros. And it's okay, fine. I'll pay. Right. The other thing that's good about being on the public system is it correlates to your income. So if you are not making a lot of money, like you pay almost nothing. But in good years, you're paying a lot. So it's better when you're older, because if you're on a fixed income or have no income, and I know people that make comfortable six figures that are on public because they know private insurance is going to be more brutal when they're older, and they can do all the bad things that private insurance can do, like throw you off for whatever condition or whatever. So I've been on both and I've been very happy. One thing I will say as an American is when I got the job at Sapient, they sent me to a insurance broker to pick like my health plan. And I will be forever grateful for this guy because he said, oh, you should go on this particular plan because this insurance company will cover you in your home country. And a lot of health insurance companies will not do that for Americans because of the American system. And I ended up working on a project in Florida in like the early aughts. And I had a surprise surgery, like a heart surgery. I had pericarditis. It was very weird. I was like otherwise totally healthy. And I had to go to the hospital for 3 days while working on a project. Anyways, I kept calling them saying like, I'm in an American hospital. It's like going to be $1 million. And it was $100,000 for 3 days.
Oh,
and
wow.
They said, no problem. You're covered for 90 days. You just have to deal with the billing. Like they just didn't want to deal with the billing. So they put like 80,000 euros in my checking account and I spent like 6 weeks paying the bills. But I was very grateful to have had that plan covering me back home.
That's wild. So they just, they gave you the payout and
they said, keep all the receipts, keep all the billing, send it to us. I sent them this giant manila envelope full of billings and they like went through it and boom, just put it in my bank.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild. Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. I don't think I'm in Portugal and we have a similar like public private split, but the private insurers here, it's like you're covered in Portugal and maybe at a couple of specialty, at least on my carrier, maybe some specialty centers in Spain and France, and that's it.
Yeah. Like, you can usually always buy extra coverage.
Right.
So I now I'm on public, I buy travel and I make sure like, if I'm home, it covers all of that.
Yeah. The idea of going without any kind of travel insurance on a visit back to the US is like,
Do you want to move to Europe, but you don't know where to start? Or have you started researching different country requirements and you're feeling overwhelmed by all the conflicting information out there? Check out our new membership community. It's a curated learning space where you can discover and compare your options for moving to Europe, get one-to-one support from me, and connect with other Americans who are planning their own moves. You'll also have access to monthly Moving to Europe mini courses, regular live Q&As, and the tools you need to track your progress, along with reliable, up-to-date information organized so you can find what you need when you need it. You'll also get access to We're Moving to Europe podcast episodes a week before everybody else. And if you sign up now, you get a free 7-day trial to check it out and see if it's right for you. Sign up at We're Moving to Europe on school.com, that's SKOOL.com, or get the link in this episode's show notes.
So it sounds like the German government is set up to really support entrepreneurship and help people get started with that. Maybe?
Nein, as people say here, yes and no. In some ways, yes. The other thing I didn't mention is there's this thing called the KSK, the Künstler Sozialversicherungskasse, which is a kind of guild if you're in any of the visual arts or publicity or fine arts or even an Instagram influencer. You can join this kind of guild and they act as your employer. So you kind of do a projection of what you're going to make and they cover all your social insurance, your pension and all that stuff, which is not covered if you go out on your own and you have to pay for it. I was just interviewing somebody on my podcast. She's Australian Canadian and she does this, she like helps freelancers in Germany and her guidance is take what you need to make to live and multiply it by 3 and that's what you need to be as an entrepreneur or freelancer because you have to pay all that stuff out of pocket. And a friend of mine once said, Germany wants you to be an employee. And it's true. They really do. Like this whole system is oriented, even with the Gründerzuschuss, even with all that stuff, they just kind of want you to get a job. So for example, you have to pay quarterly taxes and it's all based on what you made the previous quarter. And if you're working for yourself, your cash flow can be very dynamic. So you're kind of always playing catch up with your taxes. And like you have a good quarter, so you pay a lot of taxes, but then you have a quiet quarter, but they're basing your taxes on the quarter before. So you always kind of have to put a lot away and really manage cash flow. And there's just a lot of like taxes and bookkeeping is very, it's a bear. Let's put it, there's more software. It's much better than when I started. And like I said, I had the luck of having a brother-in-law who did a lot of the stuff for me, but the admin is very onerous. It's getting better. There's a lot more tools, many of them in English, but they don't make it easy. And remember that Gründungszuschuss, it's only really works if you've been paying, had consistent employment. It's like leaving a corporate job.
Yeah. You can't just walk into Germany and be like, I'd like this stipend.
Yeah.
It's something you
won't
earn
happen.
by paying in.
Yeah.
We want to make that clear for people.
Yeah.
So
Has that been the biggest challenge for you, is dealing with like the administrative stuff and the bureaucratic stuff, or like what are the big things that somebody needs to know about building a business in Germany?
Yes, that is, something you definitely have to be aware of. But outside of that, which is not small, the challenges are kind of the challenges of building any business, developing a pipeline, finding a clientele, getting your messaging right. You have to make some decisions. Like, I do have definitely clients in Germany, but I also have clients in Canada and Singapore and all over the world. So I made a deliberate decision that I was going to operate my business in English rather than German. So you kind of have to make those decisions right out of the gate. If you want to do something like e-commerce, that can be tricky. Especially now, like with sending stuff to the US. The first business I started was digital. I was doing these printables because I never wanted to deal with shipping and all of this. So I just wanted digital products. And I made some mistakes, like trying to scale. Like I thought, oh, it's going to be so easy. I'll just scale into all these other languages. And I was kind of taking the mindset that I had working at a big global agency into like little old me, which was not the right way to think about it. I should have just picked a niche and mastered it and then like tried different languages and that kind of stuff. But I guess if I said to anybody, it's really just like a network. You have to decide, are you going to serve, like, what does your business model look like? Does it have to be a local customer base or can it be international? That kind of thing.
Yeah, because anytime you start getting into new markets, then you have new taxation issues, you have new reporting requirements, currency conversion stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to manage. Plus the localization of the things that you're marketing.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
One. Sorry, my dog's also here.
It's all good. Hi, Pepper.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things mistake I made at the beginning, for some reason I thought, well, everything's so complicated in Germany, I'm just going to start an LLC in the States, and you can just do that online. And I realized I didn't need that. It made everything more complicated. I just realized you kind of just got to bloom where you're planted and work in the system that you're living in. At least that's what made sense to me. Because so in Germany, to start a corporation, you need this, maybe you've seen this GmbH. That's like, but you need to like have 35,000 euros to establish one of those. They have a smaller one that's sort of like an LLC called a UG, but it's all a little more complicated and you might not need it and all this stuff. But compared to when I was starting out, there are so many companies now, and anybody's moving to Germany, I have a guide with like all the different like apps and tools and companies that help you do this now that didn't used to exist. But it's a lot easier than it was. And you should just, I get everybody's circumstances is different, but I would just say, accept that you're in the country you're in and try and work within their system.
Right. And if that means hiring local professionals to help you with the taxation and business structure, invest in your business that way.
Yeah.
So what have been the biggest, I guess since you've been there and it sounds like your whole business life has been in Germany. So I guess there's no real way for you to directly compare it to an experience in the States. But for you, what have been the biggest upsides to having your own business in Germany?
Well, for me, I guess it would be the same anywhere. I was really grateful to that 10 years at a corporation here. I am grateful for, because that really made getting established easier. And I wouldn't try and do what I'm doing now. You can. And I have, like, the first episode of my podcast is a woman from Canada who like came here, had babies, gave up her career, and then like built a business. But it's sort of easier if you like have that infrastructure of a corporation kind of to help you get established. And then it's just all the other things. For me, just autonomy is really important. And even though there are 6-week vacations and all the things here, and there's more work-life balance, I just need to be able to control my own schedule. And I also enjoy like what I do. I like marketing. I like working online. I like having an international clientele.
Let's say somebody's listening to this or watching it and they've been thinking about moving to Germany, maybe on a freelancer visa, or maybe like to work for a multinational company,
Mm-hmm.
but they want to start their own business at some point. What do you recommend that they do? Like, what are a couple of things that they should do maybe before they come,
Mm-hmm.
and, to kind of get them off on the right foot?
Well, I mean, it really depends what kind of business they want to run. And
Hmm.
also making sure, like, say you want to start a side hustle, that might be the best way if you've got like corporate employment. I think you need to make sure that's okay with your employer. And I think usually it is, as long as what you're doing isn't directly competing with your day job. That can be the best way to go. And then you just want to make sure you've got a way to report whatever income you get from the side hustle. You just have to have like your taxes in ordnung and all in order. And then again, like anything, you just have to start building a network or an audience, whatever it is, whatever, if you're going to start a Substack, that's, one thing you kind of got to get going. Or if you're doing a services based business, you've got to start building a pipeline and networking. The person that I alluded to who came here, she had like a pretty booming career in Canada and met a German guy, moved here and started having kids. And she worked in like organizational development, human resources. And when her kids started getting older, she just started networking like a maniac and built a really successful HR consulting practice here. Just by leveraging her expertise both in Canada and here and networking like a maniac. So there are ways it can be done, but and again, with the exception of a lot of the kind of taxes and admin stuff, it's sort of the same things you have to do anywhere.
Right. Is networking in Germany like substantially different than it is in the US? Are there like cultural differences, or just like, different expectations for how people network?
It's interesting because a lot is in English, at least in Germany. I don't know how it is in Portugal, but it is a very, and especially, well, also in Berlin. I'm in Munich, but the startup scene, business, English is kind of the lingua franca, for better or worse. Because, within Europe, people have to speak English to each other. If you have somebody from Italy and somebody from Germany, they usually speak English, and kind of the expectation in a business setting is that you speak English. So it can be a real advantage for anybody who's comfortable in English. So there are all kinds of Luma events and meetup events and business networking, and often they are in English. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I am not interested in the startup scene, but if I was, you could go out and do like 2 or 3 events every day. Like there's so much stuff happening, stuff at the universities, and like you can like double that probably if you're in Berlin. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then there are some of the more traditional groups, like, I don't know, Rotary and stuff like that. But those tend to be German speaking. So, and I think those are more kind of long established groups and are harder to break into. There are also events, like, it's hard for me to get out of my own bubble. So there's a global event called Creative Mornings. It was started by this woman who's a designer. She's actually from Switzerland originally, but she lives in New York. And those take place all over the world. And so almost every big city has one. And like for the design community, it's a morning talk and you go to it. But so those are good ways to network. And when I first got here, there were just a lot of, I don't even remember. I'm sorry, it was so long ago, but I think you would get like emails about like some after work event. And that's how I was just kind of going to these expat things. And that's how I heard about who was hiring. You just kind of got to get out, just be out and about. That's all there is to it. And the person who told me about the job at Sapient, then she was working at this company that later folded. And then I got her a job at Sapient. We've been friends forever. That is also one way having a company job is good, because you do build also a network. And then some of my ex-colleagues became some of my early clients.
Right. Yeah. Having those connections ready made is
Yeah.
it just makes life easier when you're trying to build your own business later on.
Yeah.
So Yeah. So what is the expat community like? You're in
Munich.
Munich. That's what I thought. So
It's interesting because when I first got here, I'm not a joiner, but if you're going to do something like that, you kind of have to be a joiner. You have to like go and join everything. And so at the time, I joined a lot of like American women professionals and political, like Democrats abroad or whatever. And then at a certain point, if you're going to be here and decide to stay, and I had like decided to stay 5 years in, you kind of get out of that. Like your life doesn't become about that anymore. And at some point, it's important that you do, because I remember I was going to these, used to be like these curry nights, and it also became a lot of expats complaining about Germans all the time, which is not, I'm not above that. But after a while, it's sort of like up or out. I'm not going to just live in this expat bubble. And so at some point, I made this deliberate effort, like, I'm here, I'm going to be here, and I'm going to get better at the language and be part of this culture and not just live in this like weird bubble. And so while I definitely kept some foot in that world, you sort of just move on with your life, and it isn't about, and then you like other things take the place of that. I have a kid, I have a husband, there's just like, I have a dog, you start going to kindergarten things and family, your own social life, and you just move on, and it just becomes your regular life.
right. Yeah. Yeah. You build your new life. So
Yeah.
interesting.
But there are a ton of things. And I think right now, I mean, the other thing I'll say is when I started kind of dipping back into this world with this side project, the Germany List, and my podcast, it was like a whole new universe. I can tell you right now, there has never been a better time in some ways, because again, I came, like, there was the internet, but there were just like chat boards, and you would hear about these things on email. But now there's a young woman who's originally from Vietnam, and she has an Instagram channel. I forget where in Germany she lives. She's got like 1 million followers. It's all about like her life in Germany. And there's tons of people like that. There's tons of YouTube channels. There's just everything. Like, you are not like figuring it out like some kind of space explorer like in the olden days. So I think it's very easy to come in, find a community, get plugged in, and go.
Right. Yeah, that's true. You don't have to dial into Prodigy.
No, none of that. You just find a couple of expat WhatsApp groups or international groups. There's also a lot of like accelerators for immigrants, and
nice.
Americans Count. So people reaching out, like people that have like kind of dual country backgrounds or dual culture backgrounds. So there's no shortage of stuff.
Right. So maybe people who are preparing to come research some of that before they go, start making those connections ahead of time so they can kind of walk into it and start building their networks.
And there's Facebook groups galore. Like those are, I'm not, again, it's sort of like, I forget, I don't go into them so much anymore, but there's like international parents, new in the city, there's just like a ton of that stuff. You just like go in there and you'll find everything you need to find.
Absolutely. So we're going to have your LinkedIn and your website in the show notes. Please tell us the name of your podcast so that we can drop that in there too, and people can go check it out.
Yeah, so my podcast is part of a side project called the Germany List, and the podcast itself is called the Germany Expat Business Show. And I interview just people like me who have started or running a business that aren't Germans in Germany. And my own site, where I do my own work as a digital strategist, helping experts and thought leaders showcase their expertise online, is just my name, eleanormayrhofer.com.
Okay, great. It sounds like the podcast would be a good place for people to start too, if they're interested in getting inspo. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll drop that link in the show notes. Eleanor Mayrhofer, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today, and best of luck on everything that comes next for your business and your family in Germany.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and please drop your questions in the comments. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more tips about planning your move from the US to a country in Europe. Our producer and editor is Magdalena Laas at Unscripted Creatives. Our music was composed by Sage Barton, and I'm Casey Kelly. See you again soon at We're Moving to Europe.